I
Like,
have a vendetta against
I know,
Wi-Fi contests.
I
They
know.
are.
Conversely, if it's a guy that you absolutely know doesn't want to put the ball on the floor, there's probably some value to
Well,
it.
what are the kinds of threes that you think they need to attempt more?
Off-screen threes is my answer to this. I think you should be definitely running Julian off pin downs. Get him used to it with the second unit. Run a Starge off-ball screen with him and force them into making that. If they're going to try and switch it, okay, then you run that into another screen with Julian and then get the big on Westbrook, right? Like there's all these mechanisms that you can run.
Our next segment, I wanted to talk about the math game, which has been a very dangerous game for the Nuggets in their first 4 preseason games. It's been a dangerous game for them in the past as well. Every team is shooting a ridiculous number of threes versus Denver this preseason, and yesterday was, I think, their worst loss of the preseason against OKC. And OKC actually took the fewest threes of any team against them so far. Boston took 61 in the first game, 47 in the next. Phoenix took 53s against them in the game after that. And that has been prompting this conversation about, or sort of augmenting the existing conversation about the 3-point math with Denver, both in terms of their inability to take and make threes and their seeming inability to prevent teams from attempting threes. Are teams shooting more threes against Denver specifically, just as a way to play the math game against a team who usually wins the paint battle, or are teams just shooting more threes in general?
There's a selection bias. They face the Celtics and the Thunder.
Yeah.
Like they face the teams that are like, we're going to shoot a billion threes. We're going to play a very efficient game.
Well,
And
the
they face
Thunder don't actually shoot that many threes, and they didn't take as many as they didn't last year. That's not a high frequency part of their game. They're not a top 10 3-point shooting team in terms of their shot diet, the Thunder, but the
right.
Celtics definitely are.
So the Celtics definitely are, and the Suns are a Mike Budenholzer team,
Right.
right? So that was the big question I had about them was, are they actually going to listen to Bud and take the advice and actually adjust this volume? And I asked Bud about it pregame, and he was very diplomatic about it. We're just trying to add to what's already great about this team, which is the right way to frame it. Like that's such a smart way to frame it for players. I'm not trying to change you. I'm trying to add to your game. That's something that players will be a lot more amenable to when they get into this. So OKC, you're right, is not a volume 3-point shooting team. They are a hyper efficient 3-point shooting team.
Yes.
I think it's likely that they're probably going to shoot more this season, but a lot of this is offset by just like preseason. So it's like selection bias. 2 of the 3 teams are going to be high volume 3-point shooting teams. I think Thunder will probably be higher than they were last season. And it's preseason. Those are, I think, are the things, because I don't believe any team is doing game scouting on these opponents. Because like Malone is like, well, I told them this, that, and the other. I'm like, they're not listening to you about the opponent like they don't care. Right.
Well, I think the Nuggets might have over scouted Ryan Dunn because he's not supposed to shoot threes, and then he had like a career, like he shot and made more threes against us in one game than he did in his entire last year in college.
Let's say that a team has a game circled versus Denver. I think that will be part of the game script. I don't think it'll be part of the standard scouting report, because in part, like, this frustrates me, but it's true. Very few teams are ever like, change the way that you play for this opponent. I don't know that's going to be like a huge issue in the regular season, unless just like they just don't defend the 3-point line, which is where Malone's frustration is right now. Is he genuinely feels like they're just not defending, that they're just not paying attention to the scouting report, which is true, because I think it's preseason. And if they do that in the regular season, they're going to, like, it will be a problem. Like, these are the tendencies are the issues. When he's like, hey, Isaiah Joe is a 42% shooter and they're leaving him open, that's problem, right? And so I don't think that teams that's like line one on the scouting report, but I do think that they will see it from time to time as a huge issue, lowering their win probability.
Malone actually, talked about how the ball containment is really bad on the perimeter, and that's what's causing them to get in rotation. And I tend to agree with Malone because the scheme hasn't really changed. Jokic plays at the level, and last year they were actually second in opponent 3-point rate, so adjusting for pace and all of that. In the year prior they were 16th, which was not as good. But the reason I talk about opponent attempts is because I think that that's more important to Denver's success, just on a feeling. But Malone talks about 3-point defense in terms of limiting the other team's efficiency. Do you think that opponent 3-point efficiency or attempts are a more important defensive metric in the modern NBA?
Okay. So the analytics side is going to tell you that 3-point attempts is objectively the more important metric. And I am very rarely going to just like, no, it's not, to people that do this for a living. Whether that's not only on the media side, but it's also on the team side. Like the team sides are like, yeah, it's just luck. It's just percentage is just luck. The difference, though, there's a intervening variable here, and this happens across sports, where there are certain teams that you will notice are continuously more quote unquote lucky year over year and you'll be like, why they were lucky this year and this year, and then like it never regresses. It's those intervening variables that you have to be on the lookout for. And the intervening variable in this is rhythm. You can contain 3-point attempts, but if you give up 25 great in rhythm threes, you are still going to be in a world of hurt. And if you give up not 60, that's bad. But if you give up 40 out of rhythm looks, it's still going to probably be okay. And so the determining factors here are like that, and it's impossible to quantify rhythm. You can get into openness, but there are lots of out of rhythm open shots in the NBA, and there's lots of in rhythm shots that are under contest. I asked for about 2 years, I asked every shooter I talked to, this is back in the day and I needed to start doing it again. I talked to every shooter that I interviewed. I asked them, would you rather shoot a wide open shot with a defender who is tall and long closing out on you? Or would you rather shoot with a smaller defender right beneath you? And every single player said they would rather shoot with a smaller player right beneath them, because if you're not in my line of sight, I don't see you, I'm knocking that down. Shane Battier was the exception to this rule. Shane Battier is like, no, the math says you want the open shot. This is not debatable. This is not a preference thing. You are going to make the shot more often if they're not underneath you. That rhythm question, I think, does matter. It matters by shooter too. And there's been a lot of studies of the Bucks in the title season were really good about allowing a high percentage of looks to the right shooters. That to me is like very dangerous and can get out of hand very quickly. That's where I start to be like, I don't know if this is like, I feel like you're so close to an extra rotation and giving it up to the wrong guy. So the answer here is, I don't think that the objective, all that matters is 3PA. I don't buy that. You don't want excess attempts, and you don't want high frequency of rhythm looks. You need some sort of metric for shot quality that is going to be almost entirely qualitative in order to get a more accurate measure on that, but that's going to depend on the analyzer. So it's a very tough question, and the answer here is don't allow a lot of in rhythm looks.
I'm surprised that you said the analytics people think that 3-point attempts matter so much, because I was surprised digging into the stats on this. 3 of the top 6 defenses, I was mostly looking at top 10, but when I noticed that these 3 top 6 defenses were actually bottom 5, that means that they allowed a ton of opponent 3-point attempts. That was OKC, the Pelicans, and the Heat. Talk about 3 teams that keep you out of rhythm. The Heat with the way that they defend, and obviously the Pelicans and OKC just with all of the length and rotations that they make to keep up their scheme.
Yeah, so there's 2 factors here. One is what I talked about under Bud, which is if you're able to target specifically, we want this guy to shoot. This is the guy you're going to leave open, and you're going to funnel the ball to him, and we're going to dare him to shoot. Because all defense really is, beyond turnover creation or playmaking at the rim, all it really is deciding which shots you're going to live with, right? And that's why drop is so effective, because you're basically saying we're going to live with pull-up jumpers off the dribble from point guards. Like that's what we're going to surrender, is we want to give up those kind of shots. And the OKC and Miami are both good at that. The other thing to keep in mind here, Houston's another team I would kind of mention on this, that there is like a basic effort level, how much effort you put into defense, how much pride you take in that. And what that translates to is you might generate a lot of 3-point looks that are under heavy contest from great closeouts. Now, great closeouts can be flybys that result in even better looks or drives for lobs.
I have a vendetta against flyby contests.
I know.
They are,
I know.
especially for Like, why are you doing a flyby contest on Derek White?
right? Right? But if it's on conversely, if it's a guy that you absolutely know doesn't want to put the ball on the floor, there's probably some value to
Well,
it. And
they'll
I actually,
sidestep and just shoot from
but
right there, or they'll fly in and just grab their offensive
but
rebound off of miss.
here's a good question though. Let's take MPJ last year before he magically learned to dribble. If you did a flyby on him and he goes to that step back, do you feel like is that a worse percentage look?
Oh
And
yeah,
he will
he would like
sidestep
sidestep.
sometimes.
He would sidestep, yeah.
And that's the thing, right? And so
Yeah.
like, these are like the little margins that can wind up mattering a lot. Look, there's bad flybys. I think then there are times when it's warranted to be like, especially depending on clock situation. This is why
Yeah.
it gets very, very, very complicated. Like a flyby with 12 seconds left on the clock, you're dead. You're dead.
You're out of the play.
You've already like you might as well just keep running back to get on offense. You might as well try and cherry pick because they're going to score. But if it's 2 seconds left on the clock and you make that kind of desperation effort, that can definitely rattle it and cause a 24-second violation and cut off the chance of an O-reb. There are these teams, the Raptors were really good at this under Nurse. They were really good at allowing the right shooters to shoot. Again, I have some skepticism of that about your ability to do that. And the Bucks ran into this problem a lot with Miami, where it was like that's one of the things that they've gotten hit with versus the Heat is, yeah, but if you have a coach smart enough to build in the counter mechanisms, all that means is you're going to try and prevent the shot, and they're going to find ways to get the right shot. And your scheme is going to get all out of whack, and they're still getting threes. There's a whole lot that goes into this. It's one of the reasons I think it's a lot more complicated than it's made out to be. It's why I don't like it's just luck. All that matters is 3PA. No. And I don't like if they don't make them, no, if you deal with volume, even a low percentage is going to kill you. So it's got to be this like very big balance between the things. I mean, that was one of the arguments we were having last night on Media Row is, look, the Nuggets don't need to shoot a lot of threes. They just need to not prevent or not allow a lot of threes. I'm like, I think it depends on the team and the situation. You're not going to get Boston to shoot 20 threes. It's not going to happen. They are not going to
Their floor is like 40.
Like,
now.
yeah, they're not going to let you. They're too good. They're not going to let you dictate that to them. So you better be able to hit enough to negate that advantage. And that to me is where it kind of gets into is I honestly think that instead of 3-point defense and 3-point offense, it's more that you should view those two things in concert and adjust accordingly based off of who you're facing.
That's a lot to do on a night-to-night basis.
The NBA is hard.
An 82-game season.
Yeah.
The other thing about the defense point on this math game, those three teams that allowed a lot of 3-point attempts from their opponent, OKC, the Pelicans, and Miami, they weren't great paint defenses last year, really, but they were great defenses. Like I said, 3 of the top 6, but they were also top 10, especially OKC was first in forcing turnovers, because the math game is not just about 3-point shooting. There's a lot that goes into, winning possessions. I just wanted to know, why do you think that Denver doesn't force more turnovers? Like, you'd think because of the roster construction, we have all these big, long guys that should be, good defensively. It feels like they lean a little too hard into playing safe positional defense when I think maybe you need to be a little bit riskier.
The idea, and this is actually it's a Spurs concept. Like the Spurs were this way. One, they don't switch. They switch one. They do switch 1-4. I get that, but they are not going to switch the 1-5. They're going to play at level most of the time, or Jokic plays more drop than he used to. You are trying to contain the types of shots that you're allowing and not allow breaks in it. Denver, I think also because they're not a great transition team anymore. They were 2 years ago. They are not now. There's a real risk in that. But here's the biggest thing is just if you miss on a turnover drawing attempt, again, it's like that flyby. It's as bad as a flyby. If you gamble and you miss, the teams that gamble a lot are almost never good defenses. The teams that prevent the shots that they're trying to prevent and allow the shots they're trying to allow and then rebound well are great defenses. That's a very sustainable, successful model for defense. OKC has the luxury of having a million high performance athlete wings that can all switch and fly all over the floor. And I will also say, one of the big reasons why I don't think Denver forces a lot of turnovers is because Jokic is back the hell off of caring about defense. Their blitzes are just not as good as they used to be. They used to be able to really hedge effectively and force those weak side ball rotations that you could snipe off in the corner. And they just don't do that as much. They just don't. They're not as good at it anymore. They don't care as much. And so that's one of the reasons why I don't think they create as many turnovers. Teams are just trying to attack them in, I think, different ways. And I think that positional defense also, I think, by inherently lowers the amount of turnover drawing opportunities that you're going to get. It's safer. Would it help? Sure. I think so. I think you could always be better at it. Individual deflections, but like Jokic caused a lot of deflections. AG's good at it. KCP was good at it. And like, that's going to be the key for, I think, Jamal and Christian Brown is like, they need to create a lot of deflections this season defensively in order to open up those kind of opportunities. And we'll see if they can do it.
I am a little bit worried about Russ's gambling on defense because I know that he wants to get a turnover and push the pace. So that'll be something to monitor.
Denver joins Boston, Houston, and Cleveland as these are all stats from last season, as the top 10 defenses that were all 15th or worse in opponent turnover percentage, especially Boston and Denver, who were bottom 10 in that regard. None of those teams are top 10 in pace. And so, there's like a chicken egg thing there. It's like, well, if you force more turnovers, maybe you'd be, a faster pace team, but teams that like to play slower, maybe they like to do the like bleeding the shot clock and, suck the life out of the game on defense that way, as opposed to high risk, high reward style that, say, the OKC Thunder play.
Dunks and threes has got defensive possession length, and Denver was like middle of the pack, 18th in that.
Okay.
In part, I think because with Denver, a lot of it's like either it was really good defensive possession or it was terrible. Like there's very much and last year was more good than it was more good than terrible. And in previous years, it was more terrible than good. And so that's always kind of the question I think with them is. Malone just, I think, is always going to want to clean up mistakes. If you have Jokic and you play, and this has actually been true, he's right. This is why the turnovers thing drives him so nuts. If you don't turn the ball over and you have Jokic, you're going to win. Their winning percentage is like 80% when they have fewer turnovers than their opponent and Jokic plays. Pretty easy formula. And Malone's always trying to get to the most direct path between A and B. I think ceiling matters for fans. I think it matters for analysts. But I don't think it matters for coaches because they're trying to avoid disaster. And that's part of the dynamic that you have to balance.
So the other half of the math game is obviously the offense. What are the kinds of threes that you think they need to attempt more? We talked about corner threes supposedly being this really high value shot, catch and shoot threes, pull up threes.
Off-screen threes is my answer to this. So a lot of the frustration and one of the reasons why I think the offense doesn't feel as explosive, even though it's still very good. But one of the reasons it doesn't feel as explosive, there were so many plays in that 2023 season, 2022, 2021, 2020, where Jokic would post up, the double would come, and he hits those whip around passes to the corner for wide open threes. Guess what? That's on the scouting report now. Like teams are just like, park your ass in the corner when we double. Do not allow him to get to that pass. And taking that away is a problem. The kind of counter there is like, if only there was some sort of person who was in charge of figuring out how to counter that, like a coach of some sort. And that's not like a shot at Malone, it's a shot at the staff. Is like, this team is still running the same stuff they always have. They need an injection of innovation. They need changes. They need more mechanisms. And I get that they don't want to risk messing up a good thing because they need to win games to try and win a championship. But there has to be this is like, in some ways, this is about the same stuff that the Calvin Booth Malone divide is about. What's the quickest line between A and B? Run the same stuff. What's the best line between A and B? You need more offensive ingenuity. They need more sequences where guys are coming off pin downs, off ball to get motion. There is so little movement now off ball for a team that used to, like, they'll cut and they'll run sequences to force teams into bad positions and create open layups. They need to do a little bit of that to create open threes. They just need to generate a few more of those kind of opportunities. And yeah, like a layup's great, but you need to also be able to generate some 3-point looks as well. And I just see two guys parked on the other side waiting, and the other side either running two-man game to try and force the defense in to hit those guys or other sequences. Like the league is just used to them now. And again, they still have a great offense. So like the coaches would be like, what are you complaining about? Like, why are we complaining about the offense? Look how good we are at offense. I get it. But the offensive ceiling and their ability to compete with these teams from a math perspective has to be balanced out by quality looks coming off of movement. And they have neither the personnel nor the plays to do that right now, which I think is an issue.
I actually think that Julian Strother provides some potential to do exactly that. And we've seen it throughout summer league, throughout the preseason. We saw it from him last year in his rookie season as well, and how he appears to be very comfortable operating within these movement sets.
Yeah, I would love to do that. To have I think he should be definitely running Julian off pin downs. Get him used to it with the second unit. Run a Sarge off ball screen with him and force them into making that. If they're going to try and switch it, okay, then you run that into another screen with Julian and then get the big on Westbrook, right? Like there's all these mechanisms that you can run in order to take advantage of that, depending on the defensive coverage. And Sarge, I think, provides a big advantage in terms of being another shooter who can also slip to a spot of three. Zeke, if he's going to be actually playable, provides that as well. So I think there's a lot of mechanisms here. But yeah, I think Julian is maybe the best weapon that they might have on roster as far as an off-ball mover to create open threes outside of Jamal, who I don't know wants to do that.
I think I disagree with you that they haven't been running a lot of off-ball stuff to generate threes. It's just a lot of above the break and wing threes, not so much to generate corner threes. And oftentimes what ends up happening, because they try to run a lot of their same sets for like every player on the roster basically, is you end up with a player like Christian on the wing, like hesitating to like take the shot because like, I was hoping the defense would do something different here so that I could pass it. But, you know, even throughout the preseason, we've seen some of that stuff. Like I said, run for Julian, run for MPJ as well. And he's looking a lot more ready to take better advantage of those opportunities.
Denver was 6th last season percentage of time spent on off-ball screen possessions via synergy, which is like these margins are very narrow on all these, but it does kind of support your idea that they did generate a fair amount of those possessions, and they were really good at them, generating 1.065 points per possession on those situations. They shot 45% with a 55% EFG. Like that all grades out really well. I will also say I think it's hard to generate corner threes out of off-ball movement because you wind up getting crowded. Like I just think you run out of space. Yeah. Like then there's a higher probability of turnover there, either by stepping out of bounds or the ball being placed into a spot where you're trying to catch it and you go out of bounds.
So, I also think when Strother was playing, Malone wanted to run those pin downs for him and run him off screens a lot. Like he just inherently is a player that a coach is going to gravitate to that. And I don't know, I feel like it's just an eye test thing, and maybe I'm wrong about this, like you just read the stats, but I feel like fans wanted way more of that with MPJ.
I think that they ran it a lot with MPJ, but he wasn't quick enough to generate the separation fully, and so the play would end up resetting once he got the ball because it was easier to defend than it has been through what we've seen in this preseason.
Yeah, I agree with that.
No, I agree with that too. That's a perfect explanation.
Oh, okay. I was going to say you can disagree with me.
No, I think like he has something to work on with that, and I think he's looking good, and I think they're going to do that more. I think, like Matt was saying, the coaches know they need to be way more like intentional about their sets, and even Jamal said, like we talked about this against the Wolves, was saying, we're too random out there. We need more organization, and I think that they trust each other so much, just their chemistry, the natural chemistry, and I think there needs to be a little more direction on the coaching staff side too.
So with respect to corner threes, catch and shoot threes, and pull-up threes, Denver got worse between the title year and last season in both attempts and efficiency in all three of those categories. Malone has even said it is the best way to get open threes is in transition. They actually had 97 possessions per game, which was a full almost possession and a half less than in the title years. They're like the only team in the NBA that got actively slower as the NBA got faster, just in raw terms. Is this just a case of needing to push the pace more?
I don't agree. I don't think so. And the reason I don't agree with that assessment is what kind of threes are you generating? Do I like the idea?
Christian Brown transition above the break.
Pull up threes? Yeah.
Pull up threes, yeah.
So like that's the kind of thing is like if you say we want to push the pace and shoot threes, you will wind up with a lot of Puget threes, pull up jumpers and transition threes. Like,
well, what about taking more advantage of semi-transition to get into your sets faster and just?
There's two things. There's transition and there's tempo, right?
Sure.
Getting into your sets quicker is absolutely what Denver should do. Denver should be getting into their sets always by 16, 17 seconds. First action, not bringing the ball over the court. It should be first action, first screen set, first trigger, first cut needs to be at 16, 17 seconds. Pressure that defense and make them make multiple rotations with the best passer in the NBA, the best playmaker and this team that is so smart and presents so many problems, make them defend that for 16 full seconds every single possession, and you'll win. Like, you just will. You'll win. Letting them off, not initiating until 12 seconds is letting them off the hook.
Yeah.
It makes it easier. Don't do that. Do I love the idea of Russ pushing the pace and kicking to a wide open Michael Porter Jr. in the corner, like was such a big thing in the title year? Absolutely. Those are great looks. Michael Porter Jr., Julian Strother spacing to the wings and shooting pull-up threes. Would love to see Jamal do a little bit of that, right?
Yeah.
Like, would love to see Jamal. Would love to see Jamal shoot a catch and shoot three every now and again. And so those are the kind of shots that I would want. But when you're talking about just like as a broad term transition, and I don't think, you know, Malone would argue. He'd be like, well, I'm not telling him to shoot bad threes, Matt. But I do find that if you tell players as a talking point, hey, we want more transition threes, they're going to be like, okay, cool. And that's not what you want. They have so much offensive talent. You do need to be deliberate with the shots that you take. This is not an expansion year of trying to work on your game and develop that into a weapon. And it's a bad weapon to have anyway. It's not a high percentage look. So I think that tempo would be great? Yes. Tempo, absolutely. Tempo, earlier shot clock threes, 100%. Pressure the defense, create open looks. But that's got to be balanced with making sure create open looks.
Yeah. No, I think I agree with that. And that was sort of my defense of the Nuggets pace last season, because it was like, well, and, you know, the half court, they were just scoring most nights, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, against certain matchups, there are advantages to just trying to catch these really stout defenses off guard. One of the other things I noticed when I was looking through all of these different, comparisons between the title year and last season, the Nuggets went from 3rd to 19th in rim efficiency. That's 62.7% at the rim last season and 66.5% in the title year. That's like a massive drop as a team. And I know you've talked about how that title year in particular, the season that Jokic did not win MVP, he was like ridiculous at all levels, including his at rim efficiency, which took a serious dip last season. So that's, definitely a part of that number, considering he's the player who probably takes the most shots at the rim of anybody at the team. And I wonder if, part of, helping this offense out is just doubling down on what makes him good, which is scoring in the paint. Christian should be better at finishing at the rim than KCP, but they were the same last season. He took a 10% dip in his rim efficiency between his rookie year and last year. Reggie to Russ is that might actually be a decline just because of Russ's inefficiency at the rim. Like, neither of them were good. Yeah, and I already mentioned Jokic's rim finishing. So what do you think about that question and just like efficiency at those high value shots?
So I don't find that the Nuggets, from a mid-range perspective, depending on where Jamal's at, like, I don't love the idea of them being like, yeah, we're a mid-range team. I don't think that's a good idea ever. But I don't think that's a good idea for almost any team. The Suns underperformed because they didn't take enough threes. It's not like you don't want to generate shots at the rim, right? You always want, like, that's the best shot because of the conversion rate. You need a bounce back year from Yoke. I will say I worry about this from the perspective of, like, I feel like Christian's going to take a higher volume of shots at the rim than KCP did, because KCP was willing to take the DHO pull-up free throw line jumper, which he was pretty good at. And I feel like Christian is not in a place to do that. So he's going to keep trying to drive to the rim and quote unquote be aggressive, which is going to result in fouls, which he's then going to miss the free throws on.
Well, he'll make one of them.
Yeah. And so that is where I think, like, you will start to run into some serious problems. Jamal being more of a finisher, less of a desperation tough shot maker, probably a good idea. This, to me, though, goes back to, hey, you need some ingenuity, you need some new stuff, because I think that they've got most of your stuff scouted. Some of it's not even like scouted. It's more that they've played against it so much they've started to anticipate it. This is a problem in the playoff series. If you notice in the Wolves series, like, the first game, you're really caught off guard by everything. And then by the 7th game, you're like, I know exactly the timing on this sequence. It's why game 7s are so phenomenally ugly all the time. And so I just think that they need more ingenuity to create high quality looks. One of the things I actually do kind of like is, yes, Russ's inefficiency at the rim is a problem. What's Russ's inefficiency going to look like off Jokic passes? because Russ has been a more willing cutter than he has been in the last couple of years. And if he actually takes that to heart, like we saw in that lob in the inverted pick and roll for the dunk in the third preseason game, he's got a lot of opportunity there. So I think there's all these sort of ways, but they have to invest in these kind of mechanisms in order to get, again, good looks at the rim and not just like heavily contested, trying to throw it up in between 5 people looks. Jokic has just got to shoot better at the rim, period. He just has to. Like, he's expected to, because that's how good he is. And it's not fair because no one should be as good as he is, but that's the expectation.
Okay, so the last thing that I had on the offense here with the math game is actually going back to media day and Calvin's media day comments. He said, quote, "We are riding a fine line," right? This was in contrast to what you mentioned before about Malone being like, "Nope, the roster's fine. All good. I'm a team player. Like, we're going to be good." The shooting in particular was the only thing that he went like that far in sort of citing that concern. So I'm actually wondering if that's something that they might actually do at the trade deadline. What position that's like guard, big, wing, do you think getting another like shooter slash competent, someone who can do something with the ball would help the most on this roster?
Big, absolutely big, 100% big. The drop off from Yoke to the non-Yoke minutes, I think, is a lot more complicated than people make it out to be. And they make it out to be just about talent. Oh, the bench players are all awful, and they're letting them down because with these awful players. And I'm like, there's something about the way that the Nuggets play where it makes it difficult for them to adapt without Nikola. And you need some sort of facsimile. And I think they're hoping for Dario to be that. My question is about Dario's durability and the rebounding side. If you are able to find a competent backup 5 who can also operate out of the pinch post and shoot a little bit, and if you're like, that sounds like a dream player, that sounds like Nikola Jokic, I'm not asking for like I'm not asking for a 40% 3-point shooter, and I'm not asking for a 7 assists per game guy. I'm talking about has the capability to do it. I've been screaming for Kelly Olynyk since the beginning of time, and I will continue to scream about it. He is the perfect fit for that second unit. He would be absolutely awesome in that role. It would give Westbrook, I think, a better pick and roll partner, because Dario will do like I said this last night into Media Row. It's like Dario's going to do the job and not complain. Hey, you're a 5 now. Okay, we'll do. No problem. Like, he'll do it. But is Dario Saric like the ideal stretch 5? No, he's not. He's like an ideal stretch 4. So the ability to be able to generate, especially given how many teams are going to double big now, like the idea that this is still like a small ball league is outdated.
Oh, yeah. Everybody got bigger. All the centers got paid big bucks this summer. And I'm like, oh, what the hell? None of these guys are gettable on a minimum anymore.
Yeah. And so you got to be able to kind of generate these kind of things. And there'll be drawbacks to anybody that they would get. But, Zeke is still, and this was a touchy point last night with Malone, but he is still better suited as a 4. I think Saric is totally fine as a 5. I just think it's like, would it be better if you had somebody who was bigger and could screen for Russ? Yeah, I just think that would be better. I think it'd be great to have both options, to be like, hey, we can't play this center because they're going to put him in pick and roll and destroy him. We need Dario's ability to switch. Okay, we'll go to that. Hey, we need somebody who can actually get a rebound and can
Did
be
you
able
just
to
say Dario's ability to switch?
Yeah.
Like now at this stage in his career?
Okay. So there's a difference between the reason so many teams want to switch is it's just easier.
Yeah.
It's just easier. Are they going to attack Dario? 100%. Are they going to have to help off? 100%. Are they going to lose that battle sometimes? Yes. That's why Dario's not a starter. But if you like, can Dario? It's a degrees question.
Yeah.
Can Dario switch more than DeAndre?
Yeah.
Right? Or if they were to get, Olynyk, Alex Len, Frank Kaminsky, any of those options, and I know it's like, those guys. This is what you're talking about. This is what you have room for on the roster. You're not trading for Jakob Poeltl. You're not trading for Mitchell Robinson. You're not trading
or
for
even
Goga
Kelly
Bitadze.
Olynyk. Yeah, or Goga Bitadze.
Yeah, you're not trading for those guys. So like you're going to have to deal with this level of play. But if you're able to get somebody who provides you an alternative to Dario with also some redundancy, that to me would help, I think, the most with adding it. Now, their perspective is going to be, who can I actually play in a playoff series? And that I'm just like, who are you going to get with your assets at the deadline who is going to be able to play in the playoff, like is good enough in the playoff rotation? like as like an indicator here, Buddy Hield was unplayable in the playoff series.
He was, and I was like, what happened to him? I don't even know why. He was playing just fine for Indiana leading up to that trade.
Right?
It's like he forgot to learn how he forgot how to play basketball just at the trade deadline.
Yeah, and so
up until Game 6 against the Knicks.
Right. And so this is the thing. And so I just think that like any move that they make will have to be very much in the margins. And so if you're going to do that, I would rather do it at big where it's like, hey, this could help Russ. This could help the spacing. This could help the screening, and it could help the rebounding. So that's why I would say big.
That's really good reasoning. So I was thinking about the thinness at guard, but it's that's more something I wish they'd address immediately. But I understand
the guard thing. You're just going to have to accept is just like that. Their fate was sealed when they signed Jalen Pickett to a multi-year guarantee deal.
When they signed both Jalen Pickett and Hunter Tyson to multi-year deals,
but on the guard front in particular,
sure.
Because
you have another roster spot.
The natural thing is for him to be on a standard second round pick contract and be like, hey, it didn't work out. You know, we'd love to have you in the G League. We still want to work with you. This is not, but we gotta let you go. And then go find insert bet here. An unnamed media member and I were in the room being like, why is DSJ out there? Why is Dennis Smith Jr. just out there? Nobody signed him. Nobody's got him. If you just had Dennis Smith Jr. as your third backup emergency point guard, it would remove this gigantic question mark, because that's the thing with me last night. It was a tough matchup with the Thunder, but it's also like, so you're telling me if Jamal sprains an ankle and Russ has got knee soreness, this is what you're left with. And that's a huge problem. That removes your ability to sneak out a game versus a lot of teams.
You know, when Grace and I were first talking about starting a pod, we definitely bonded over how much we appreciate Matt's analysis. And, you know, his analysis is something to aspire to. So thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to do that, for sure. Is there anything else you want to say before we...
Anything you want to plug?
I mean...
No, but
find Matt everywhere.
Yeah.
No, I would just say you guys do a great job, and I love the show, and it's absolutely awesome, and you're both really insightful, and I appreciate you guys having me.
Listeners, please remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell on YouTube. We're trying to get to 1K subs, so please subscribe if you like what you heard on today's episode, and also subscribe to our Clip channel. And remember, winning is fun, and hopefully we get a lot of winning in the regular season and not a lot of losing, because losing really sucks.